Adrian's quiet kingdom. Death in Embervale was geography, not verdict. 5 rivers girdled Adrian's realm, Styx for the oaths you shouldn't test, Acre for sorrow, Pyrophlegethon for fires that believe in forever, Coquitos for laments you can hear if you stand on the right hill in spring, and Lethe for forgetting that lets a soul try again without luggage. Sharon Road for coin, and families slid obols beneath tongues with hands that shook and eyes that did not. Hound King Cerberin wagged only at those who belong, which is one kind of mercy. Minos, Rada, and Aeacus counted deeds without envy and sent the worst men to Tartara to push rocks and taste water they could not drink. The best walked the Alicia where breezes are fluent in comfort. Some few chose the cup at Lethe and asked for another dawn, thin as glass. Persephora learned to be 2 stories, maiden of meadows and queen of doors. Adron took her in a rush the poets still argue about. Damar froze the world until a compromise was hammered out, 6 seeds and 6 months, or 1 seed and a season, depending on who tells it and why. In Eleusis, torches glowed and secrets taught men and women to believe that seeds and souls do similar work under dirt. Odesson heard Achilles say, "Better a hired hand alive than a king here." Lyria and Theron heard a different thing, "Live so you are not embarrassed by your ghost." The Sander and the Thread. Athens did not begin with wisdom, someone had to sweep the roads. The Sander, prince by 2 fathers, one salty, one mortal, grew in trees and learning how to listen to old stones. When he could lift a boulder and find beneath it his father's sword and sandals, he took the land road north, because easy roads teach little. He cleared the path of bullies who pretended to be legends, a club man whose club changed owners, a pine bender who learned to fly the hard way, a wrestler whose neck loved pride but not leverage, a bedmaker who discovered fit works both ways. Athenians began to talk about going places without fear. In Creon's shadowed palace on the island of Crete, King Minar refused to return a war's justice. Every 9 years, 7 youths and 7 maidens walked a ship's plank to feed a shame. Torox, the man-bull pacing the puzzle that Daedalus built to hide power from remorse. The Sander volunteered and met a princess with eyes like new honey. Ariane placed a thread in his hand and a quiet at his back. "Find me when you return," she said, "with the part of you the maize cannot eat." He found Torox in the heart of the turnings. They fought like 2 explanations of the same thing. The Sander's blade learned to be patient. He followed the thread back into moonlight, ran, and betrayed Ariane on a shore where the god of vines whispered choice into his ear. The sea keeps the taste of her tears. When the Sander's ship neared Athens, the grief in him forgot to lift the white sails. King Aegeon saw black and stepped into the sea that remembers him. Power makes us clever and cruel. The Sander later bound the villages of Attica with law instead of rope and built a city where argument could be holy. Lyria loved that story, that sometimes a single thread is the bravest weapon. The ending you came for. Nights came soft again. Children in Embervale learned to count by olives and stories. Elders told of a time when mountains threw themselves and horses taught cities humility. Lyria's hair silvered like surf, Theron's shoulders stayed square, but softer around the eyes. They were not royals, not demigods, not killers of serpents or stackers of corpses. They were the kind of heroes the Iron Age actually needs, those who choose love, then choose it again. When their last winter ripened, they walked to the small oracle beneath rosemary and dust. The priestess listened to a place no map remembers and said, "Your threads are almost done. Do you want to knot them together at the end?" Lyria laughed. "We've been doing that since the market and the mule." Theron grinned. "Make it a good knot." They slept that night with the window open. The wind smelled of rain promised and delivered. In the morning the hearth had gone out on its own, which is one of the ways the world says goodbye. The town wove a shroud together, women and men, children and old, singing the songs you sing when gratitude is larger than grammar. They placed obols gently, because ferrymen deserve wages. They told their children 2 names to remember, and not because those names had spilled kingdoms but because those names had kept a promise. Hope fluttered at the lip of an old jar and decided, as it always does, to stay. Good night. Pyrrhion and the Mare Shield. heroes burn trails others later mistake for roads. Pyrrhion, child of a bronze tower and a whispering rain of gold, was promised by an oracle to end his own grandfather. He and his mother, Danae, were flung to the sea in a chest, and the sea pretended kindness long enough to shove them ashore on Seriphus, where a fisherman named Dictys mended his nets and his loneliness. The island's petty king, Polyctor, wanted Danae and despised the boy who stood between desire and habit. "Bring me the head of Madrasa," he said, meaning to bury the problem under an impossible wish. Athena loved fair shape of mind, and Hermes loved a scheme that walked. They armed Pyrrhion with a sword curved like a question and a shield polished to an honest lie. He stole an eye from 3 grey sisters who shared it between them and paid the ransom with truth. From hidden nymphs he earned a sack for impossible cargo, winged sandals, and the cap of shadow. Pyrrhion walked backward into the lair, eyes on brass rather than serpent hair, and his stroke was so clean that silence became a kind of music. From the severed neck leapt Pegasus, bright as blizzards, and Chryser, a man carrying gold in his name. He escaped as outrage tore the air behind him. On a foreign shore, he found Andra chained for a city sin and turned the sea beast to sculpture with a gesture. The rescued woman looked at him as if prophecy could have freckles. They sailed together. Polyctor learned to hate the suddenness of stone. Theron listened to that tale as a boy, then as a man, and learned this: sometimes the mirror is sharper than the sword. The 5 peoples and their autumns. The poets later sorted mankind by metals and memory. In the Dawn Age, under Corinne's slow watch, lived the Oryx, gentle, doorless folk who died like sleepers and walked afterward as kindly daimons. After them came the Silvers, tall, long-childed, with quick anger and dull piety, and Zephyrion ended them with a storm. Next came the Bronzes, born from ash spears, all clangor and appetite, houses and hearts hammered from the same metal. They left fields red and stories thin. Then, for a bright interruption, the heroic, sons and daughters of gods and mud together, builders of walls, riders of wind, shorter-lived but loud in song. Last came the Irons, our time, shoulders hunched, backs burrowed into work, good at surviving and forgetting. Yet even in iron, Lyria was born, hair like wheat just before sickle, eyes that learn every shade of blue the sea could invent. She moved like a hymn whispered on a hill. And Theron walked the same century, long-limbed, shoulders like a gate, jaw cut like a coin, kindness found beneath a warrior's polish. In markets, old women tapped their foreheads and said, "Those 2 are threads the more I weighed carefully." They did not meet first in glory, but beside a cypress, where Lyria bartered figs for oil and Theron argued gently with a mule. Their first words were about weather, the second about bread, the third about whether fate can change its mind. They laughed, shy at how the world tilted to make room for 2 people in it. 3 realms and an oath. Rule is easier to seize than to keep. Zephyrion knew this before his beard grew in. He looked upon his brothers and knew love and problem. They cast lots in a silence heavy as snow. To Zeus, no, to Zephyrion, went the sky and the in-betweens, cloud roads and eagle paths. Poseidon took the waters, sea roads, river veins, the laughing springs. Hedion accepted the realm beneath, without complaint or trumpet, the land of remembering in price. Earth, Vesa herself, remained a commons between them all, a table no single hand could clear. The 3 swore a compact, no war among brothers, lest the world's ribcage crack. They spat into the same bowl, as shepherds do, and drank the mingled oath. On Olympus Zephyrion called council. Hestia tended a flame that never learned to tire. Damara walked among mortals and taught their hands patient shapes. Herae sat beside the king, crowned steady as a verdict. Athena sprang later from a story of fear. Metis swallowed whole to prevent a son greater than the father, only for wisdom to hammer open Zephyrion's skull and step out in harness, eyes clear as winter. Apollo, gold on the tongue, played music that bent time. Twin to him was Artemis, moon quiet, friend to fawns and arrows. Aregeus loved thing-breaking more than victory. Hephaestus limped but made bronze move like thought. Hermes laughed, and Lox learned what losing felt like. And Everia sat serene, making kings fumble cups with a look. This court did not resemble mortal palaces. No walls, no guards. The air itself was border and blessing. Marble and cloud learned to cooperate. No snow dared settle. Sophists might later sneer, but here justice had a seat and thunder a conscience. Herakon's 12 Prices. Herakon was strength wrapped around repentance. Hiria's old, cold anger pushed madness through his mind, and he killed those he loved most. When reason returned, it tasted of salt and iron. He went to Delphi and knelt in smoke. The gods spoke through a woman whose eyes looked centuries away. Serve Eurystheus. Pay the world back in impossible deeds. So he wrestled the Nemean lion in a cave where echoes died, broke it with his arms, and wore its hide because shame hates a second skin. He and his cousin Iolan burned the Hydra's stumps to nothing. He chased the golden-horned hind for a year and brought it home breathing. He laughed, dragging the Erymanthian boar into a panicked court where a king hid in a jar. He rerouted rivers through filth and called it honest work. He frightened iron birds from a marsh and felled them as they rose. He hugged a Cretan bull until fury had no breath left to kick. He fed a tyrant to his own man-eating Mares and watched a metaphor whinny. He tried diplomacy with Amazons and ended in blood anyway. He crossed the world's lip to fetch red cattle from a triple-bodied herdsman. He tricked Atlas into holding the sky again with a compliment at the right moment. He went down, unarmed, and returned with the keeper of doors snarling at his heel, gentled only by the promise of return. He died later by accident of love, a tunic spiced with Hydra's grief, built his own fire, and climbed it like a staircase. When the wood sighed, Zeus, Zephyrion, lifted him to seats where godhood bruises less. Theron, hearing, wondered which price would be his. Lyria and Theron, or the pattern we choose. Not all epics are about kings. Some are about two people insisting the world is made of choices even when fate laughs. Theron's village needed walls, not for enemies but for weather that had forgotten gentleness. Lyria knew herbs that turned fever into sweat and anger into sleep. Together they turned a clearing into a commons, a market into a council, a fear into a festival. He set stones without breaking their stories. She lit hearths that taught neighbors to become kin. When raiders came, men with hunger in their mouths, Theron stood in the gate with a spear that remembered good teachers. "Leave grain in the granary," he called, "and we will feed you on the road." They laughed at mercy and lunged. The first died on a sentence, the last on a lesson. The survivors limped away with food pressed into their hands by the woman whose beauty made them forget to hate. At night, under a fig that had learned to be generous, Lyria and Theron spoke softly. "Do you think the more I cut us sooner for being happy?" he asked. "They cut everyone," she said. "Let's make them jealous of what they have to end." They had children, 2 then 3, and taught them to hold tools like promises. When plague came, as it always does in some generation, Lyria worked until her hands shook, and still she sang. When grief sat on the sill, Theron shared his chair. Years later, gray at the temples, they climbed a hill no map names, looked at the valley that had learned their names, and held hands the way doors hold hinges. "Is this enough?" he whispered. "It is everything," she said. Before time had breath. In the beginning there was no mountain for storm to crown, no sea to mirror the moon. Only the maw, a vast, listening hush. It was not rage, nor kindness, nor even balance. It simply opened. From that opening shivered the first facts of being: Vesa, the Earth Mother, broad-backed and patient; Tarth, the deep below, cold and echoing; and Uria, desire's first spark, the tug that draws thread to needle, lover to lover, star to star. From Vesa's slumber rose Noctra, night in a mantle of velvet, and beside her came Umber, the darkness that pools in roots and grottos. Noctra and Umber, leaning together, breathed out Aerin, the bright, clean hire the gods would one day prize, and Day, the pale gold runner forever a step behind her mother. Vesa felt her heart like a drum and brought forth Archeon, the sky, strewn with cold fires. He was both her sun and the arching dome that kissed her hills. When Archeon bent himself over Vesa, the world found its first outline, a blue bowl above a green plain, promise pressed to promise. From Vessa's ribs climbed the mountains, antlers of stone. From her sighs welled Ponte, the sea, restless before ships had timbers or sailors had fear. Sky and earth paired, and their union woke heavy powers. From them came the 12 primals, titans in shape and scope, whose names were spoken like seasons: Helion, Light, Nemora, Grove, Kor, Question, Piraeus, Flame, Aglos, Pillar, and Corinne, youngest, keenest, with their sisters Aurelia, Shine, Rhea, Deep Womb, Thetisca, Right Order, Nema, Remembering, Phoessa, Radiance, and Tethra, Nourish. They were not yet gods as men later prayed to, but truths walking. Yet Vessa's womb knew darker seed. She groaned and birthed the One-Eyes, Brond, Stera, and Argesh, forge-browed smiths whose single gaze burned like a kiln. After them came the 100 Mites, the Senatons, with 50 faces and 100 hands, mountain throwers whose laughter shook caverns. Archeon, wide as sky but narrow in courage, flinched at these children of awe. Shame and fear turned him cruel. He pressed them down into Vessa herself, bolting the gates with sheets of stone. The Earth Mother bore her sons a second time, as paying. Vessa's roots creaked. Rivers soured. She whispered to her Titan brood, but most looked away from their father's thunder. All but Corinne, youngest, watchful. "Give me a blade," he said, and Vessa shaped a crescent of unyielding flint, jagged as truth, keen as grief. The Riddle Kings of Theon. Theon's founders sowed dragon teeth and reaped men, Sparta whose grandsons could not stop inheriting trouble. Cadmon's luck curdled into necklace curses and daughters with the misfortune to be interesting. From that house came Laius, who heard a prophecy and set it in motion by trying to refuse it. His son, Oidion, swollen-foot, clever-tongued, killed a stranger at a crossroad because pride travels faster than information, and then answered a monster's riddle because humility sometimes borrows a brain at the last second. 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, 3 at dusk, hissed the Sphinga. A person, Oidion said, and Theon crowned him with a widow. Years later the city sickened on a secret it no longer had the appetite to keep. Truth walked in on blood, and eyesight left the room. Oidion begged for exile and earned it. Antigona, faithful daughter, held his elbow on the road and learned how to become a law by breaking one. Lyria, hearing how fate knots and unknots, touched Theron's hand. "We will not be puppets," she said. "We'll read the strings and tie our own." The sea is a bad listener. Odesson tried to explain himself to Poseidon, and the god answered with weather. There were islands where Psalm wanted to eat you, groves where a woman turned rowers into swine and then back again when his apology rang right. A goddess who made time feel like honey and kept him for 7 years inside a beautiful cage. A cave where giants I learned the word, nobody, and hated languages ever since. Straits where one set of teeth was cliffs and the other was a whirlpool pretending to be a mouth. A beach where hungry men ate sacred cattle and the sun held a grudge. He went down to ask dead men questions they'd have answered differently alive. He met ghosts who would rather be farmhands than legends. He came home in rags and a plan, strung a bough that remembered him, and turned a hall of bad guests into a reminder that courtesy is not optional. Pennell, who had woven off suitors with a loom's patient lie, made him prove himself with furniture the roots knew intimately. Not all kings returned to applause. Agamemnon found a blade waiting at bath time and Cassandra's warnings still unlistened. Diam discovered fame is not legal tender at home. Ajax the Lesser learned that gods remember what you do in temples. Menandros and Helara aged into a silence some call truce and some call failure. Theron listened and didn't say, "We will do better." He took Lyria's hand and said, "Let's try." Ruma and the White Silence. Even gods learn to age. Far to the west, a city of wolves and walls, Ruma learned Greek names the way conquerors learn recipes, with changes. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera Juno, Poseidon Neptune, Athena Minerva. Ovid spun the old stories into a new fabric that glittered on different shoulders. Virgil hitched fate to a Trojan named Aeneas and pointed him toward empire. Temples filled with disciplined incense. Philosophy clipped the wings of myth and taught it to speak in syllogisms. Some said the gods were metaphors, Some said they were atoms, some said they were useful. The imperial cult braided flattery with ritual. Emperors learned how to pretend to be thunder. From the east came other ideas, a soldier's cult in caves, an Egyptian mother with stars on her robe, a single god invisible as breath and just as necessary. The old altars did not stumble in battle. They were starved by new hunger. And then came the final blow, not from a spear, not from a siege, not from a clever horse, but from a silence. One by one, the statues could hear less. Sacrifices thinned. The smoke that once wrote prayers on the air wrote nothing anyone read. Olympus discovered it could be lonely. Oracles and the measure of thread. The Greeks do not change fate, they speak with it. At Delphi, the Pythia breathed stone and said sentences that could fit two meanings like a snake fits two turns. Kings misheard boldness for invitation. Farmers misheard warning for weather. Croesus crossed the river and dissolved his own empire. Oidian fled the wrong city and ran headfirst into prophecy's arms. At Dodona the oaks themselves clattered counsel. At Ammon the desert spoke in bright, dry syllables. In dreams ancestors thumbed the tent flaps of the living. The Moirai, Clotho with hands that never learned boredom, Lachesis counting and frowning, Atropos with her shears that never find rust, stood above even Zephyrion's pride. Once he swore by Styx and had to keep it when it hurt. Gods hate being reminded of rules. Theron and Lyria went to a small oracle no map bothers naming. The priestess smelled of rosemary and dust. "Your lives are a woven thing," she said. "You may not choose the length, but you may choose the pattern." Lyria smiled like the first understanding. Theron exhaled, taller in relief. Fire given, hope kept. Frithos, the titan who preferred plants to feasts, walked the hills and saw new creatures rise from mud and breath. Soft-skinned, slow, clumsy in winter and clever in hunger. He loved them for their difference, not their promise. He went to Olympus and begged a boon. "Let them learn heat and hinge," he said. "Let their nights be shorter." Zephyrion had only recently unbolted a world. His fingers were still lined with ash. "Not yet," he said. "Let all remain. Fire is royal." So Frithos climbed anyway, walking the back stair of stars. In Hephaestos' forge he pinched a coal and hid it in a fennel stalk, a glowworm burning with new grammar. Down the mountain he came, and into a circle of shivering mortals he placed the world's first hearth. Flame taught them stew and metal, and stories that last past midnight. A king's anger is heavy. Zephyrion punished Frithos with patience, chains on a mountain's lonely shoulder. Each day, an eagle's hunger. Each night, a liver new as moonrise. Frithos endured and would not give the god the one secret he had, that the king of sky must never seed a son with the Tisca, for such a boy would break the ceiling of heaven. Silence became Phorethos' victory. Zephyrion struck back at mortals with a gift disguised as thunder, Panthera, the all-gifted. Hephaestos made her clay soft as cheek, Aviria breathed charm. Hermes hid curiosity under her tongue, Athena dressed her in sense. They handed her a sealed jar, and a husband, Apteron, kind and easy to fool. Panthera's wrist trembled, the lid lifted. Troubles have feet. Out rushed toil, fever, envy, age, war, and all their bickering cousins. Last inside, fluttering against the lip like a small bird, was Elpis, Hope. Panthera clapped the seal. Hope stayed. The war that split mountains. Vessa whispered into the boy's dreams, free the buried. Métis, counsel given skin, taught him the taste of patience, and the trick of emetics sticky as honey. When Zephyrion returned to his father's hall masked as a cupbearer, Corinne drank and groaned and brought forth what he'd hoarded. 5 gods stumbling outgrown and golden, blinking as if from a long tunnel. Hesta, Damara, Hurrier, Hedion, Poseidar. They stared at the throne and remembered everything. Corinne's brothers gathered at Oris, the old seat in the south. Helion burnished his spear. Coir sharpened questions to a point. Pyrrhus warmed his palms over a private coal. Only On, the river who encircled the world, stayed neutral, too old or too wide for feuds. The Titanomac was a storm without calendar. 10 years of sky split like fruit, of islands gulped whole, of pine that learned the taste of fire. Zephyrion held Olympus, fresh and jagged, the Primals, Orus, scabbed by centuries. Vesta swayed like a patient under surgery. At the hinge of the 10th year Métis made a sign. Zephyrion broke Tartha's doors. Down he went, into iron cold as judge's breath. He freed the One-Eyes and the Senatins. Gratitude has a craft. The One-Eyes forged gifts, a trident with a voice like undertow for Poseidon, a helm woven of night for Hedion. For Zephyrion, the thunderbolt no hand could learn without scars. The Senatins came up swinging mountains as if they were mere arguments. The day tilted. Corin bled pride and would not kneel. He was bound, not slain. Vesta had taught her son that prisons sometimes last longer than graves. The Primals were chained in Tarth where echoes tire. A few were spared the pit, Phorethos and his brother Actaron for choosing the future over the past, Thetisca for seeing inevitability and nodding. The sky cleared as if someone had opened a window. Zephyrion's hand found the world's bridle and did not tremble. Wine, masks, and the edge of wild. Diason was born twice, once from Semele's desire and once from Zephyrion's stitched thigh. He walked the far hills with satyrs, teaching vines the art of becoming courage, teaching cities the cost of refusing to dance. In Theon he lured Pentheus to a hill where the king's certainty learned what torsion means. Agave returned holding a lion head that was a sun. But in theaters under his sign, masks taught truth by pretending. Tragedy and comedy learned to trade shoes mid-stride. The Orphics sang about tearing and remaking, about a god who can die and still pour in your cup. Mystery's promise was not dominion, but knowing. Not power, but participation. Lyria felt the music. Theron felt his jaw unlock from duty long enough to smile until his face remembered. When the dance ended, laws still mattered. But the people who obeyed them had learned they were made of more than bread. Rage and the price of a friend. What loosened the seams of the Greek alliance was not walls or horsehair helmets, but a quarrel about a girl. Chrysia belonged to a priest of Apollo whose prayer arrowed heaven. The god returned plague like a whisper you can't stop hearing. Agamemnon returned the girl but demanded Brazia from Achaeos, who felt that insult like a firebrand laid on his name. He sat down. He made war learn what absence is. The Trojans surged. Hectorion, who loved his wife and city more than the sound of his own armor, led them like a lighthouse leads ships, steadily and toward rocks because rocks were the point. Greek ships smoked. Patrick, friend and maybe more, begged Achaeos, "Let me be you for an afternoon." Borrowed armor is always heavier. He drove the Trojans back to their gate and died beneath Hectorion's spear, a kindness exchanged for a catastrophe. Achaeos returned to battle with a new gift from Hephaestus, a shield engraved with everything worth saving. He killed without counting. Then the duel everyone had written in their bones happened. Hectorion circled the walls, feet drumming the same fear as any man who has ever wanted to be a father longer. Achaeos chased. A spear decided what was already decided. Grief made Achaeos cruel. He dragged the body in a circle until an old man, Priam, king and broken father, walked into the tent with a bag of ransoms and the courage to kiss the hand that had emptied his house. Achilles learned to be human again for the length of a conversation. Arrows find ankles if gods point them. Achaeos died later. The war didn't end because of that. Wars like this only end in trickery or fire. They got both. An apple and 1,000 knives. It began with a party that forgot to invite trouble, so trouble came anyway. Eris tossed a gold apple into a feast for the marriage of Peleus and Titissa. To the fairest, it read, which is cruelty in 3 words. Hurriae, Athena, Aviria. They smiled sharp and summoned a judge, Parion, a shepherd prince with the doom in his pocket. Hurriae offered rulership, Athena offered victory, Aviria offered the love of the most beautiful woman breathing. Parion chose the promise with the softest teeth. Hilera was already married to Menandros of Sparta, a king whose hands knew rope and hospitality. Whether Hilera went willingly or under spell, the oath that once bound her suitors tightened like a net. Kings answered, Odesson of Ithaca with cunning tucked into his cloak, Nesteron, old and sure. Ajax's two, one tall as a wall, one quick as a cut. Dium, who preferred deeds to speeches. Idomeneus, whose steadiness could hold a mast in a squall. They found Achaeos, son of Thetissa, hiding dressed as a daughter among daughters. He picked up a spear with the hunger of someone who's just remembered his own name. At Aulis, the wind forgot its work. The seer Calchas tasted the air and said Artemis was offended. Agamemnon's daughter, Iphion, walked into a story her father couldn't live with. Some say the goddess swapped her for a deer at the last gasp. Others say the blade was honest. Either way, the ships learned to move. The siege of Ilion, Troy's other name, lasted 9 harvests longer than anger can plausibly justify. The Greeks camped because pride cannot swim home. The Trojans endured because courage teaches endurance in the same classroom as stubbornness. The gods picked sides like cousins at a wedding. War, which is a very old appetite, took notes. The Mare of Cedar and the Knight of Doors. When the Greeks vanished from the beach and left a monument taller than a promise, Troy's watchmen rubbed their eyes. A horse of cedar, mane like waves frozen in prayer, stood where ships had rotted. A Greek named Sinon, whose mouth was a harp, sang lies and half-truths until even caution became curious. Only Laocoon, priest of a god tired of salt, hurled a spear and heard echoes from within. 2 sea serpents arrived at just the wrong moment to strangle good advice. Ropes creaked. Wheels groaned. The horse kissed the city gate's lintel. Night came heavy. Wine came heavier. A trapdoor swung and lightless men spilled out, Odesson, Menandros, Dium and the rest, oiling hinges and throats. The fleet they'd hidden behind an island returned like remorse. It was not war. It was a house broken from the inside. Neoptolem, a boy in his father's armor, cut Priam down at the altar's feet. Cassandra screamed prophecy no one would hear and was dragged by hair that smelled of temple smoke. Astynax, a baby and a symbol, learned the shape of air from too high a drop. Fire retaught stone what orange means. At dawn there was smoke and a lesson nobody wanted. Helera returned to Sparta with a husband who loved her in a quieter voice. Odesson began a journey that does not love straight lines. Lyria wept at that part, not for kings but for kitchen gardens, and the way lamplight still tries to be brave. Last council on the mountain. Once more, the court of heaven gathered, fewer prayers under their feet than before, but dignity is not audience size. Zephyrion looked out over thunder he no longer always needed. Heraeus set down a long anger and picked up a smaller one she could carry without limping. Athena sharpened a new spear called Law. Hermes learned to move messages along roads that had never heard of cloud. Damara watched winter with more patience than before. Aviria, who had watched empires start wars over her eyelids, smiled at a pair of mortals sharing figs under a tree and felt, for the first time in centuries, that desire's best trick is to make kindness look inevitable. Zephyrion spoke last. "The world moves," he said. "Let it. We are not less because mortals need us less. We are more because they became what we hoped, brave enough to argue with storms. The gods did not die, they changed address. Some went to libraries, some to vineyards, some to the small silence between two lovers who refused to become strangers. Adron kept his keys. The rivers kept their work. The fates, tired as any trio who has done a job since the first day, went on snipping and measuring with a professionalism that never once asked for thanks. Flint at midnight. The trap was simple as a heartbeat. When Archeon came low to smother Vessa, Corinne rose from shadow. The flint sang. The sky screamed. Power fell, blood and brilliance, and the end of one tyranny. Corinne flung the broken source into Pantheus' arms, and from the white froth that gathered near a rocky shore a wonder stood, a figure lovely and terrible, gliding as if born from light itself. Aviria, desire given face. Waves hushed to see her, gulls circled speechless. Men yet unborn would one day raise cities just for the chance to name her. Where blood struck ground, other things sprang up, the Nemesis, fury shrouded, oath hunters with patient feet, the Gigerons, storm-tall rebels, and the Ashmaids, nymphs of spearwood and grove. Archeon, dethroned, fled to the clean reaches, a blue wound that never quite closed. But curses travel cleanly. As the sun unseated me, the emptying sky groaned. So will a sun unseat you. Corin smiled, but his tongue tasted iron. He took the throne of cloud and called it law. The world unclenched. The Primos ruled in a new brace of order. Vessa's breath grew sweet again. On slopes where sorrow had pooled, grasses rose. It was an age poets would later paint as gold. Theft had yet to learn its shape. Doors had not discovered locks. Corin wed Rhea, the sister with harbor in her gaze. She bore him Hesta, hearth fire steady, Damara, grain brightening its beard, Hurriye, crowned marriage, and sons who would one day toss lots for continents. But in Corin's ribcage the curse gnawed like a slow rat. When Rhea placed the newborn in his arms, he did not see a face, he saw the prophecy's teeth. And so the king of time unhinged his jaw and swallowed his children whole, first Hesta's warm cry, then Damara's spring, then Hyrie's wrath, and the boys, Hedion, Poseidon, and others unnamed in terror's fog. Rhea's milk soured to salt. 5 times she birthed, 5 times the nursery went suddenly quiet. When the 6th life kindled, she fled to Ida's rough caves on the island of Creon, where goats know stars by heart. There, attended by nymphs, she cradled Zephyrion, a child with thunder in his tiny fist. To fool Corin, she wrapped a stone in swaddling and laid it on the tyrant's tongue. He gulped his own doom and slept. Beneath Ida's pine ribs, the Curides clashed bronze to drown the baby's hunger song. Amalpha, the horned nurse, gave milk rich as prophecy. Zephyrion grew long-limbed, eyes bright with weather. Jaelon and the Golden Breath. Jaelon returned to Iolcos wearing one sandal, having lost the other to a river and a disguised goddess. His uncle Pelin smiled like a knife and offered a task. Sail to Colchis and fetch the Golden Breath, the fleece nailed in a god grove and watched by sleepless coil. It was a dare wrapped around murder. He gathered volunteers who had other names before legend borrowed them, singers who could quiet storms, archers who could pin wind, twins whose fists made morning, a huntress fast as an argument. Argus built the ship Argo, and in her prow Athena buried a speaking oak ship from Dodona that creaked advice only when pride was listening. They passed islands ruled by women over the graves of men, feasted dangerously, stole breath back from harpies, loosed the dove to teach the clashing gates about mercy, and threaded hunger with luck. In Colchis, King Eats bade the stranger plow a field with bulls that burned, so dragon's teeth, and survived the crop of armored men. It was a death sentence disguised as a handshake. Hyrie's arrow pricked Melena, Eats' daughter and Hecate's student. Love, which gets gods into more trouble than war, taught her how to betray a father. She gave Jaelon a salve against flame, a trick for quarrelsome earthborn, a song to send serpents to sleep. He took the fleece that rustled like 1,000 coins and fled with a bride whose cleverness would later be called sorcery only because men disliked the word equal. A brother died in the water piece by piece. Guild rose slowly. Pelin still refused the crown. Melena baked a lie and Pelin's daughters believed it. The city rioted. The couple exiled themselves to Corinth, where love sat down and then stood up with a bitter face. Jaelon chose a political marriage. Melena chose a night without sunlight and left in a dragon car over roofs as quiet as an apology. Theron listened hard to that one, how ambition sometimes sleeps with regret, how a promised harbor becomes a cliff.